Welcome to Wealth Matters Podcast. How are you, Scott, today?
Fantastic, Alpesh. How are you?
Good, thank you. Hey, Scott, of course, we chatted earlier this week and we connected a couple of weeks ago. Can you tell my listeners what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Spartan Investment Group. And Spartan Investment Group, we are developer syndicators. We do construction projects on every single deal that we do.
Oh, okay.
And then we syndicate capital for all of those deals that we do. And right now, we're particularly focused on self-storage and RV parks.
Oh, interesting. Actually, I have been looking into both of them, and I interviewed Michael Wagner regarding why self-storage just last week. So this would be a good segue as well.
Sure.
So we spoke about due diligence, right? And I just want to jump right into the topic so that we are not wasting time. Why would someone perform due diligence? Or even if you can define due diligence for us.
Yeah, so at Spartan, we defined it a little bit differently than what we've seen out there in the industry because we break out feasibility and due diligence. So when we actually write our contracts, we go from LOI into feasibility.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have determined our business plan is feasible, we then go into the contracting phase of our acquisitions process. Once the contract is signed, that's when we actually kick off due diligence. And I'll talk a little bit about the reason why we do it that way, and then I'll talk a little bit about what due diligence is. And the reason that we do that is, due diligence can get pretty expensive.
Right, of course.
Feasibility for us, we've got a team of folks, and we have 10 folks at our quote unquote fund level. We don't do a fund, but they're in our corporate headquarters. And then we've got another 11 to 13 folks that are actually working at the properties.
Okay.
But for us, we can do all of our own feasibility in-house. We don't have to pay, $10,000 for an outside feasibility study.
Oh,
so
nice.
We can do all that work in-house with our internal team. So for us, there's really just opportunity costs and then travel when we go to actual cities, facilities to do boots on the ground feasibility. With due diligence, it's not that way. And we can get into this a little bit later, but in order to do effective and thorough due diligence, you're going to need some outside experts.
Right, of course.
Start racking up dollars very, very quickly. So kind of how we differentiate feasibility from due diligence is feasibility answers the question to, is our business plan for this particular property even feasible?
Right.
For self-storage, there's certain demand, retail, there's demand, hotel, there's demand. Right. Everything has demand.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to demand, there's also zoning and some other basic qualifications to determine whether it's even feasible. For us, we do opportunistic and value-add properties for all of our deals. So there's a construction component to every single one of our deals. Even one that we're buying at C of O right now, there's a small amount of construction on that deal. So for us, there's no point in writing a business plan that says we're going to add 40,000 square feet of storage if there's not enough land there to do it.
Right, of course.
It doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't work.
Uh-huh.
So once we verify that kind of our thesis for the property is feasible, that's when we move into due diligence. And due diligence really looks at answering the question, is all the information that we've been provided true? So brokers put together offering memorandums, they have numbers in there and all of this. So the due diligence really verifies that all of those numbers are accurate.
Yeah, all the pro forma.
That's right. The pro forma is just that, right? It's just it's the best guess that we can make to going forward. But also, has the property been properly permitted, and a number of other things that basically make sure that there's no gotchas at the end of the sale.
Right, of course. So at what step of the process do you start due diligence?
Yeah, so we don't start any due diligence. I shouldn't say that. We do only a very, very minimum amount of diligence before we're under contract.
I see.
Because once we're under contract, to be competitive in this market out there, you've got to move pretty fast.
Right. Right now you got to have offers and under contract before you can do anything.
That's right. And sellers want shorter due diligence period, buyers
Right.
want longer due diligence.
Of course.
Inside of Spartan, we are taking people's life savings that they've worked years and years to earn to invest in these particular deals. So there's never a time when we are pressured to shorten our due diligence period. We have a set process and we go through that process. There are ways for us to quote unquote crash, that's a technical term for project management, crash the project by adding some additional resources. But we have a due diligence tracker that has 650 items on it, and every one of them is checked off or at least annotated with, if we can't find the answer, then a risk mitigation measure is put into place that if we can't mitigate it during it, then sometimes you just got to move. But the very, very, very vast majority of that tracker is checked off. Now, when you look at project management, you got three things: time, scope, and cost, right? So we are not willing to change the scope of our due diligence at all. So when sellers want to move a little faster, it increases the cost.
Right.
So not a big deal, but due diligence can get pretty expensive. So we don't do that until we're contractually connected to that seller, because there's just too much risk to start spending thousands of dollars on various studies and whatnot for due diligence before we're under contract.
Right. So do you already mentioned the due diligence checklist. So what kind of checklist is that, and what kind of items are there in the checklist?
It's the entire span of real estate. It starts out with very, very, very basic stuff in the survey for the property.
Yeah, feasibility, phase one.
Yep, all the way through environmental, even including things outside of a phase one, geotechnical, site investigative work, physical due diligence. Then also, a lot of these are operating businesses that we're buying, right? So there's admin, HR, operations, marketing, finance. So it basically, like I said, I say 650 because that rolls off the tongue a lot easier than 687. So, but I think it's actually up to 687 now. So.
And you mentioned you are currently focused on self-storage and RV parks. So does due diligence change depend on the type of asset?
Yeah, great question. So what we say inside of Spartan is 80% of due diligence is the exact same.
Right.
You have to review the survey.
Get phase one surveys. Yep.
It's very, very, very similar across asset classes.
Right.
So there's an interesting kind of analogy to Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola makes most of its syrup in one particular place and then trucks that delicious brown liquid to wherever it needs to go. And then at those bottling plants is where they add the flavors. It's called late stage customization.
Right.
That way they can get economies of scale and economies of scope by shipping out that syrup from one location, and they can tailor it at that location to local preferences. So that's kind of how we view our due diligence tracker is, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of it is standard across all asset types, all locations. And then we just do some late stage customization for the last 20 or 30% to tie it into the particular asset class, storage or RV, or you could use it for retail, medical, whatever you want to use it for. You could use it for analyzing a business if you were buying a business. Some of it's not going to be
Wow, that's great. Yeah, because you are also looking at the underlying business, right?
Absolutely.
As you said,
marketing, admin, HR, finance,
P&L, tax returns, all of that, right?
So we're really building our due diligence structure such that with that late stage customization, we have core staff here at our corporate headquarters, and then we can go out and we can contract experts for that last 20 to 30%. If a beautiful retail place showed up, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, we are currently not staffed to truly analyze a retail deal, but we have good friends that are. So we would take our due diligence tracker and we would take some late stage customization by bringing on a retail expert to be able to mash those two together so that we're able to do due diligence on basically anything with a minimum amount of outside help. Of course, we need to hire environmental folks and geotech folks. And we have our civil engineers review surveys. We have 4 different attorneys, that land use attorney, title attorneys, that review all the different sections of it. So that's why it gets pretty expensive. But we've been told, like, bar none, by our investors, one of the things that really attracts them to us is our due diligence and them feeling safe in investing in our deals.
Right. And no need to reinvent the wheel, right? You already have a lot of it covered. Yep. So do you mind taking us through your due diligence process? Let's say you found a property, which is a self-storage, you're under contract. What do you do from that point onwards?
Yeah. So let's assign some time to this, and let's say 60 days is kind of
is your due diligence phase. Yep. Right? Yep.
So in the first, call it 14, it's really document gathering. In order for us to even start, we need the survey. We need all the seller bank statements, all of that.
Plat map or whatnot.
All of that stuff. And we do as much as we can in-house with our own team in the first, call it 14 days or so.
So do you have the checklist of those documents you need from the seller? So as soon as you sign the contract, you send the document list that I need this within a week or 14 days?
It's 3 days for us. Okay. And our due diligence timeline does not officially start until
they provide those documents. Of course.
What we do, and this is for those of your listeners that are out there trying to do deals, one of the things that we do is we include that list in the contract. So when the seller is agreeing to the contract, there's no surprises and gotchas at the end of the day.
Correct. And that's what I do too. Yeah. This is in the contract. I need this within 3 days. As soon as I receive these docs, due diligence starts.
That's exactly where we're at. We've got a deal right now that technically we've been under contract since, call it like August 10th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there's one document in that due diligence list that we still don't have. And it's a very important document. We're working on it. So technically, by our contractual obligation, we haven't even started our due diligence period yet.
Interesting.
So that gives your listeners who are out there trying to buy, like by tying a time frame to a very, very specific list, it allows you some flexibility there.
Right.
Now, of course, as soon as that's not the case for us. I mean, we're virtually 99% of the way through this due diligence. We're waiting on this one document, so we'll close as soon as we get the document.
I see.
But it would allow us to extend it another 60 days after we got that document if we wanted to.
Right. If you're not ready, right?
Yes. Now that's not the right thing to do, and you should you shouldn't use that as a tactic to get more time. It's just something that protects you, so that if you don't get what you need, you can ask for more time.
Right. So let's say you have all the documents, and then what do you do? What's the step one, or what's the process?
Yep. Fantastic. So we do a bunch of things simultaneously so we can move. There's a due diligence trip that's usually 3 days or so from one of our staff members, shoots down to the property and takes that list and does all of the due diligence we can. In addition, we kick off multiple studies. We kick off our environmental, our geotech, our general business inspection, and our title review from our title attorneys. All of those are kicked off simultaneously through third-party contractors. In addition, we have some internal folks that are doing financial review, operational review, marketing review, of the various business aspects of it.
That's awesome. So, and you mentioned that you have like 80% of it covered in-house. What do you mean by that? What kind of people do you have on your team which covers most of it? Let's say, even if it's self-storage or multifamily or RV park?
Great question. So we have general counsel that looks at the title and legal and the HR stuff that they review that. We have a director of operations that reviews all of the operational components, third-party contracts, HR stuff inside the company. admin of their policies and procedures, marketing, like how well is the property marketed, all that. And then we have a director of finance that views all of their financials, reviews all their bank statements, and then physical. I'm a construction project manager at heart, so right now it's me. We just hired a new project manager that will be doing that in-house due diligence on things like, are there GFCI outlets in every single bathroom?
Right. Yeah.
It's yes, no, it is or not. Are there power lines crossing the property? Because if there are, there's an easement associated with those power lines. You got to be mindful of that. So that kind of stuff we do in house.
And so you also use third-party contractors, right? So what kind of third-party contractors?
So we have a general building inspector that goes out there, and we always pick one that uses thermal imaging. So that's kind of a tidbit to ask, to see if they do thermal imaging so they can kind of see behind.
So what's the difference? Like if they are not using thermal imaging, means they are just checking manually?
So if they're just checking manually, you can't see behind the walls. You can't see insulation, you can't see plumbing, you can't see any of that. With thermal stuff, they can see plumbing, they can see major leaks in HVAC, that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. Thank you for that tip.
Geotech. So always start your geotech early, because geotech, no matter what, even if you push them really hard, generally takes 3 to 4 weeks, because they have to send samples out for analysis to a third-party lab. Environmental, your phase 1, you can generally get that done in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But so what's the difference between geotech and environmental?
So environmental looks for anything that would have or could contaminate the soil with environmental, biohazard, chemical hazard, all of that stuff.
Yep.
Geotech really looks at the type of soil that you have. So if you're not doing, if you're out there buying an established multifamily and your turnaround plan involves placing cabinets and appliances, do you need to do a geotech? Maybe not. If you're in an area where there are troubled soils, it may not be a bad thing to have it done for $5,000 or $10,000, because just because the thing is standing today does not mean it's going to be standing 10 years.
And especially when you are doing new build or constructing, then definitely, right?
Anybody that goes into a new build or construction and doesn't do a geotech, in my opinion, is crazy.
Yeah. One of my friend, he was starting new, and he said, he wants to start building, and they bought the land and everything's done. And then I asked him, did you do phase 1? He's like, what is that? Like, oh no.
Right.
So something like that you are constructing something and you haven't done phase 1. So is it also similar to mineral rights? Because I heard in Texas you also need to have mineral rights signed over as well, right?
So the probability of you getting mineral rights signed over is 0.
Right. Usually not.
Yes. But what you can do in Texas, Colorado is that same way.
Right.
Any state that there's something worthwhile below the surface, you can get something called a surface use agreement. Now, geotech and environmental don't necessarily pull those up. Will pull those up is, the correct kind of survey that annotates easements, and also a thorough title review to see if there's any third-party rights associated with that title. That's where you'll pull the subsurface rights. And in Texas, sometimes they have their name on a stick that says that, like, one property we have there's an oil, it's called a pump jack. There's a pump jack on the property, so it was really easy to find out who it was.
Right.
Other property in Texas that we bought was very, very difficult and very, very, very convoluted with the mineral rights. And you just kind of have to make some certain risk assumptions and mitigate the risk the best you can. But you definitely need to be aware of it, that if you're in a state where there's something useful below the ground, and water can be one of those things.
Yes.
So make sure that you are well aware of the laws and the, I'll say, supersedence of the subsurface rights over the surface owner.
Awesome. So we are chatting about the third-party contractors. So which other contractors do you use? You mentioned the general contractor inspector who uses thermal imaging, as well as geotech, phase 1. Who else?
a title attorney. So if you've got a good title shop for you, they can do all kinds of background sniffing and unearth anything that's associated with that title. That's a step that most people skip and they don't ask. We've got a title company. A lot of times the seller chooses the title company. Yes. And that's fine. You can still have a title company that you've worked with pull a title report and do a thorough review of anything that's around there. That's what we do. And maybe it costs $2,000.
Right.
At the end of the day, when we buy a property, our due diligence is, depending on the size of the property, is anywhere from 10 or 15,000 all the way up maybe to 50.
Right.
But if you're looking at a multi-million-dollar property, $50,000 that causes you to not do the deal is sure as heck a lot better than $40 million on a deal that you didn't know that there's a phase 1 contaminant and it shuts down your property. You've got to evacuate your multifamily building because there's environmental contaminants.
Yeah, and especially when you have other people's money involved, right? You want to do thorough due diligence. You can't skip any of this.
And another third-party contractor we use, because we do a lot of development work, because we always bring our civil engineer in.
Of course.
If you're doing any type of construction, make sure you ask for a survey with topo on it. So that way you get a typographical overlay on your regular survey. Most folks just look for an Alta survey. That's great for the bank and the title company, but that doesn't do anything for your construction team.
It's just showing boundaries and flood zone and etc. Right?
Yep. Get a topo on there so that your engineer can go through and let you know how much cut or fill that you have to do, because that can kill a project.
Oh, really?
If you've got a perfectly flat piece of dirt, that's fantastic. It doesn't have expansive soils or anything, or any other nasty business below the surface, then fantastic, drive on. But if you don't, we have a property right now that we're looking to expand, and there's the topo on it's pretty gnarly. So before we closed on the deal, which was today, we had our civil engineer run some analyses on how much cut or fill we would need to do, or could we balance the land by just pushing dirt around. And it turns out we can, our assessment was correct. We can balance the land. But, if you're wrong and you have to fill that can be a lot of money.
That's expensive. Yeah. Because you live in Colorado, I'm in San Francisco Bay Area. So of course we have hills all around. So I see. Yeah. When you have to fill that dirt, right? So any other third-party contractors we missed?
I don't think so. Those are the main ones that we use.
So, and the last one I want to ask before we take a break is, what's the cost or around approximate cost versus the benefit of due diligence or thorough due diligence?
Yeah, so the cost is probably, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 50,000.
Okay.
The benefit, number one, if you're taking somebody else's money like you just referenced, they're like the cost benefit analysis doesn't even come into play. It's not a conversation you should even have, because you'll never be able to measure the benefit against the cost of not doing it. So it's just, when you're taking other people's money, it's not an analysis, it's a requirement. So if there's any sponsors or syndicators out there that are taking people's money and are not doing the most thorough due diligence they can, I hope at some point they're arrested and put in prison, because you should be. Because
I couldn't agree more.
Responsibility to protect your investors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Scott. Let's take a quick break. Welcome back to Wealth Matters Podcast. I'm chatting with Scott about why thorough due diligence is important in any kind of real estate acquisitions, but also it can apply to any type of business you're trying to acquire. So Scott, I thoroughly enjoyed the episode. I have one more question, or just if you can share an example or a story where a thorough due diligence saved you from a ton of headaches afterward.
Ooh, I got a fantastic one. So a piece of due diligence that a lot of people don't do is that title report pulled by your title company, right? And to get a thorough analysis of everything that is going on, not only with your property, but with the surrounding properties.
Oh, surrounding.
At one of our projects, we have some wetlands. Mm-hmm. And you have wetlands, there's a buffer that goes around those wetlands that you can't put stuff.
Correct.
So we had, the way that this project was, we had to move some stuff around on the wetlands. And one of our
Okay.
buffers was going to go onto the neighbor's property.
Oh.
Well, so these neighbors were, I'll say, being difficult. And I'll say that they were interested in financial incentives for us to
Interesting.
be able
Of
to go
course.
forward, right? So what we found was that they're through the title report and the analysis on their piece of property was a restricted conservation easement owned by the city
Ooh.
that encompassed our wetland buffer. So
That's
because it was a
interesting.
city easement and it's a irrevocable conservation easement, we automatically could use it if the city allowed us, which they did. So that ended the
That's
conversation about any
amazing.
financial incentives for this, and it ended the shenanigans of going back and forth with these people because we found that on their property. If we had not done that analysis of the neighboring properties, we would have never known that easement was there, and we would have, been extorted for not a dollar. I'll put it that way.
So, when did you ask the title company to run the title search? When the neighbor reached out to you for incentives, or did you already do the analysis and started talking with the neighbor?
So we did the analysis because it's one of our standard things that we do is pull the title report. So when we engaged the neighbor, because we knew about it, so we engaged them. We always try to be friendly with our neighbors. It's one of the things in any
Right,
development
of
play or any
course.
expansion play.
Always,
We
always.
always go up and introduce ourselves, walk through the project, see what their concerns are, see if there's anything that we can accommodate within the kind of the construct of our plan that they're interested in. So
Right.
that's a really good tip is like ask your neighbors if they want anything. And, it might be something simple. Like one of our neighbors that immediately butts up this project, all they wanted us to do to come out to our community meetings and support our projects is we have to put a tree screen in. It's a requirement. They asked us
Awesome.
if we could put in Leland cypresses. And I'm like, the
Why
hell is a
not?
Leland cypress? I don't even know what that is, right? So we ask our design team, like, hey, can we put Leland cypresses here? Is that
Is
like
it even possible? Yeah,
$10,000
feasible.
tree that I got to import from Jupiter, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, nah, it's just a tree. It's $100. So we're like, all right,
Why
cool.
not?
Line them up. And then we went back to that neighbor and we're like, hey, checked with our design team, no problem. You're going to get a roll of Leland cypresses right on the other side of the yard. He was ecstatic. It was that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely that simple. But
So you're starting, this relationship with the right foot, right? With the right mindset, and they are happy, and it just works out then.
No, absolutely. But going back, so we tried to engage that neighbor first to kind of see how they were going to go because
I see.
you get more bees with honey than vinegar type thing, and like hitting them over the hammer, like the head with you're going to do this because you don't have a choice. That's kind of it's like, vinegar mixed with gasoline that you throw on the fire, right? So, but we pull it right away because, you always want to start a negotiation with more information than the other.
Yes,
that
that is true.
Adjust inside that negotiation as you need. And you can trade things of unequal value because you have the playing field's lopsided.
Yeah, no, and that reminds me the book by Chris Voss regarding negotiation, the art of negotiation.
Right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right
I love that book, right? So same
Yes.
thing, ask a lot of questions, gather as much information as possible before you start negotiation.
Never split the difference.
Exactly. I love that book.
Fantastic book.
No, I personally enjoyed the episode. Scott, did we forget about anything?
I don't think so. I guess the last thing I'll say is due diligence doesn't stop till, an hour after you close. I should say not an hour, a minute after you close, right? So at the end of the deal, the best deal you might have ever done is the deal that you walk away from.
Yes.
So a lot of times, we've spent $50,000 on due diligence, and there's $100,000 or $200,000 that are hard and earnest money, and that's a lot of money.
Yes.
However, if you uncover something that could cause the project to become insolvent or significant damage to the project, sometimes you just got to bite down on the proverbial stick and walk away from your earnest money and your due diligence cost. We have a saying inside of Spartan: don't step over $1 to pick up a nickel.
Right.
Now, don't step over $7 million to pick up 200,000.
Right.
Or whatever it is.
That's a great advice right there. That's like the final thought of this podcast.
Yes.
Appreciate your time, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, Pastor. It was fantastic.
So the last thing, how can my listeners reach out to you?
A couple different ways. They can go to our website at www.spartan-investors.com. If you're interested in investing, just fill out the form. Or if you've got questions, please just reach out to me, Scott@Spartan-investors.com.
So I'll put that in the show note as well. Thank you so much, Scott. Have a great weekend.
You too.